Call me a prophet because I predicted the food crisis. And by predicted, I mean I was told about it and then I told all of you. Very cool. You can still call me a prophet. So, Singularity hit TKR. They did not hit the Syndicate. I was wrong on that count. And I was wrong about a bunch of other stuff. So I thought I would run through which predictions I got wrong, which ones I got kind of right, and fill you in on how the crisis has developed and where it's going. So number one, yeah, Singularity, I thought they would hit. Syndicate, they didn't, they hit TKR. This has had a few interesting effects. So if they hit Syndicate, the war would have actually been much more isolated, and so food consumption would have actually been higher. So like TKR and Co would have like rebuilt, and that's TKR, Grumpy, etc. So food consumption would have been higher if they had hit TKR. Oh, sorry, Syndicate. However, because they hit TKR, Food Crisis has also been a bit depressed, and also because Rose hasn't rebuilt because they're paranoid of Syndicate, which they wouldn't be if Singularity hit Syndicate. Then Rose's info is lower, and yeah, their food demand is also lower. So Singularity, if their goal was just to cause a food crisis, didn't think this one all the way through. At least from where I'm standing. We will cover their war in a different video because it is very interesting. But ultimately, kind of, it's a separate thing, you know. Anyway, so the food crisis has gone to, drum roll, loading screen, 390 PPU. This is very interesting. I thought it would be at like 500 or 600 by the beginning of March, which is in like a week. So it should be much higher by now, but it's not. And the reasoning for this is really interesting. So I thought that, well, basically, how do I put it? It's really annoying. It's kind of complicated. I'm going to use my revenue. So for example, my revenue is 35 mil, right? We're going to round down and say that's 30 million. If I run out of food, then I lose 33% of my revenue, right? Which is 10 million. It requires 26,000 food to upkeep the nation, right? So you do 10 million divided by 26,000. See if I have a calculator because I'm bad at math. Divided by 26,000, 384, right? So 384 is the price point where buying food becomes more expensive than running out of food. Right? I lose more from buying the food than I would not using it. Most people do not realize what their level is. And so they'll keep buying food even at 400, 500 PPU. I thought most nations, the level, like the crisis point, was 600. I thought that's how high it would be. It's not. It's like, yeah. It's actually not even, what's it called? It was like 384. It's not even that for most people. My nation is actually pretty well optimized, a pretty late game nation, all things considered. So for like the average player, it's probably like 310 or something, or maybe like 280. It can be quite low. And so this food crisis is surprisingly devastating. And that information is yet not very popular. Another thing I got wrong on the financial side is credits. So I thought credits were always going to be more expensive than food because credits are by their nature more versatile. Right? You can redeem them for all sorts of resources. You can redeem them for cash. Food is kind of a waste. However, I underestimated how many players were pay to win, and they have managed to successfully depress the food prices. And also, the paranoia, particularly among like sort of the general player base, which doesn't even watch the videos and they don't like pay attention to the game that much. Paranoia amongst them has caused them to keep buying food long past the point where it's viable, and long past the point where like they should be buying credits, right? Some people don't even know you can redeem credits for food. So that has resulted in credit prices falling. I'm still kind of surprised though that people like TKR or Rose aren't like buying up the credit supply and then transforming it to food and then selling the food. Like, you can do that and make a lot of money, but no one is. So very strange. Other thing. So one of the biggest food producing alliances is Grumpy. And they have been doing something very, very interesting. They have been telling their whales with these huge food stockpiles to sell their food. Now, initially, I thought this was a form of like gaslighting them, right? And they were telling the whales, oh, it's okay because like people are going to switch to Antarctica and Singularity is not going to be able to keep radiation high and the fallout shelter is really broken. All of those things are lies. So I thought this was gaslighting and that they were just trying to trick their whales into selling for the benefit of their allies or like other people maybe. But they were telling them to sell on the open market, which didn't gel with that. So I have a theory as to why they're doing this. I think it's actually kind of genius, but it requires them keeping certain information secret. I think Grumpy is aware that for most nations, it's not worth buying food right now. I think they're aware that the big alliances, at least the econ heads, know this as well. So Grumpy is telling its members to sell because they know that food prices won't get much higher, right? They can't actually go above 400 or 500 PPU because, again, for most nations, they don't profit off that. And those nations will eventually realize that. The secret will get out eventually. So they're just telling people to dump as much of it as they can right now whilst the prices are decent. Which would be very interesting if that was true. I'm not sure if it is. I'm not sure if they're stupid or if it's actually very smart. It's a coin flip, who knows. And that's the other thing. If, for example, if, for example, the general player base realizes that this is a scam, right? If they realize, like an econ head comes out, if I come out and say it or something, if the general player base realizes this is bad, right, then they will stop buying it, right? So the food prices will actually fall from like 390 to 360. Still not viable for the majority of players, but that'll be a huge loss for people like Grumpy. I think that is part of why they are telling people to sell still. However, in some cases, I think there were Grumpy nations with like 200 million food. Those people should sell. If you only have like 10 million food, you should not be selling. That is ridiculously unwise. Because of food crisis later in the year potentially happening. So I think they should be moderating their rhetoric a bit there. Same with Guardian. I've heard the same rumors, and I don't understand it. If there's probably some information I'm not aware of, which could be contributing. Anyway, so the food crisis is continuing at pace, but not quite as fast as I thought it would be. Aside from that, the game has been relatively peaceful, right? We haven't seen many other wars break out. And this is sort of interesting because I realized now is one of the best times to go to war. And the global nap is ending in like a week. So if people really want to do damage, now is the time because you do the immediate damage to them. Of like they lose their infrastructure. But then when they rebuild, then they're also going to suffer the after effects of the food crisis, right? So this is a period of high economic penalty. But also attacking an alliance and destroying their infrastructure reduces their food consumption. And so it also lowers the amount of economic damage they take. And for the alliance on the offensive, if you want to take a more risky war right now, then you lose a ton of infrastructure and you get hit by the food crisis. But also you have your war cycle reset. And a good example would maybe be us, right? So Camelot is not particularly rich, right? And we need to try and get long periods of security whenever we can. This food crisis will cost us like 30 billion. Even with our own food stockpile bought earlier, it's still going to be massively expensive. And because it's an economic event, not a military one, then
after the crisis is over, people can still attack us militarily. Whereas if we recognized, well, we're already going to lose 30 billion like this month or something, let's attack our stock, right? We don't lose much more money than we normally would, right? From the crisis. And at the end of the war, then our war cycle gets reset and we won't get attacked for like the next 3 months. So there's actually incentive to fight now. There's like a myriad of incentives where it's like, it's in some ways it's very good for you as the aggressor, in some ways it's very bad, and then vice versa for the alliance you're fighting. I think the golden rule with this is if both alliances are very wealthy, if they have big war chests, if they're prepared, then this is fine. And it's actually very good to go to war now rather than later. Whereas if both alliances are less prepared, it's actually much, much worse to go to war now. Or if there's an asymmetry where one alliance is prepared and one alliance isn't, the one that's prepared is disproportionately benefited much more than at any other time throughout the year. That's my analysis of it. I could be wrong. Yeah, we'll see. Oh, yes. So 2 more things. One is that there will be another food crisis later in the year. Let's find the food page. Food over time. Right. So we can expect there to be another food crisis probably around June. That would be my assumption, right? Because Singularity's war against TKR will go from February to either March or April, probably the beginning of April. In which case, then you have between 3 weeks to 5 weeks of peace where people can produce new food and try to recover some of this before the next global war. The chance of another war breaking out during that 5 weeks and messing up radiation is actually pretty high. It's very easy to do. Pretty much any top 50 alliance can do it. Yeah, I think there's very good odds that we see a perpetual food crisis that lasts until September or something, right? Because then the next global will happen and it continues on. Alternatively, yeah, we have this 5-week break and then June hits and then we have another global war for 2 months and then a secondary food crisis. And a secondary food crisis will actually be worse than this one. Probably. It depends on how big the global is, because if it involves everyone, then the food crisis will be averted because no one will have info. But anyway. Yeah, the crisis will be worse than this one because the food stockpiles will be proportionately lower, right? Like we went from 4 bill down to like 2 bill, right? If there's another one in June, like we're starting at 2 bill or like 3, right? So it's going to get way lower. I think Singularity has confirmed this as well. And because people are expecting a second food crisis, they're not going to sell some of their depot reserves. So people like Syndicate and Rose won't sell. Or Syndicate might, but like Rose and stuff won't. Which will make the food crisis right now even a little bit worse. Another factor is also the city update. So just today, the game released one of its biggest, most game-changing updates ever. They made every city in the game cheaper, and they added huge discounts for the urban plannings. They've basically rebalanced the game to allow smaller nations to catch up and compete. That is amazing. It deserves its own video in a way. I might dive into it at some point. But the ramifications on the food crisis are actually very simple. People are going to buy tons and tons of new cities in the lower tier. And this is going to raise food demand, but not increase supply. And again, as we mentioned before with the food pricing, it's actually not worth it for these new nations, these new cities to buy food. Like it's not viable for them. They actually lose less money by running out of food than they would by buying it. So the secondary food crisis in like 3 or 4 months will happen after like 10 or 15,000 new cities will be bought, right? So we're going to see like a whole new third of the game or quarter of the game suddenly pop into existence when the crisis is at its apex. And it will be very interesting to see it play out. My assumption is that we will have a March crunch where a lot of smaller alliances will face the pressure. And then we will have a June crunch as well. Yeah, again, we will see. Oh yeah, I wrote this down in my notes. Congrats, new players. Everything is cheap. Condolences, new players. Everyone is broke, which is perfect. I think perfectly encapsulates this. I have very mixed feelings on the food crisis. Not in the update. I think the update's great, and I should talk about that separately. But on the food crisis itself, I think this has been a very fun event. I think it will continue to be a fun event, and I think it will prompt a lot of people to try and work together. They just need to, I think, share more information with each other. Right now, I think one of the biggest drawbacks is alliances are not collaborating. They're not helping each other out. They're not even really working with their spheres. They're just hoarding their stockpiles. They're lying about their stockpiles. And yeah, like this is actually a really good moment where if you wanted to facilitate a merger with one of your allies, like maybe help them out. Like if you want to build a bridge across the spheres, then maybe this is a good time to help people out. And I've seen none of that. I've seen people in spheres actively sabotage each other. I have not heard of a single alliance that has given food to its allies at this point. Not one, not even a rumor of one doing it. In some cases, I've heard of alliances giving loans to their allies. But again, they're loaning them money for purchases of food which are not economically viable. Right? They're keeping the secret that it's not worth it for them. Like if Republic of Libertas, which is a lower tier alliance, if they come to me and say, oh, give us like 10 bill and we'll buy food, and like it is actually not economically viable for any nation in their alliance to do it, by not telling them that and by giving them the money anyway, I'm just transferring the burden, right? I'm siphoning their profit, just like the whale they're buying food from. It's mean-spirited. I've seen a lot of that in spheres. And I've seen a lot of small alliances getting dragged into wars which they don't really need to be in. I don't want to point fingers and name names, but alliances in the current globals have been telling their allies, like, hey, you should participate in this. And it's like, there's no reason to participate in this. This is a really bad time to go to war if, like, you are not well prepared. And, like, way, way worse than any other time in the year, or in any other year that I'm aware of. And particularly when this update drops, because those small alliances be using this time to get ahead in city development, and like really catch up. And by dragging them into wars that they don't need to fight, wasting everyone's time and money. They're wasting loyalty, right? Because those alliances that are told to fight these wars that are, you can tell they're stupid, you can tell they're misguided, that erodes their loyalty, that erodes their goodwill and their trust. And yeah, I've seen that across the game, that a lot of bridges are being burnt and people are becoming very ruthless, and they don't need to be. This is actually a great opportunity for people to collaborate. Yeah, I don't know. Those are my thoughts. The food crisis is great. I'm loving it for content reasons. And hopefully we have some more events, you know? Hopefully we have some more big wars like this, or we have some other new mechanics. Yeah.
Wait! Give me a minute!
No,
Why you have to be such a hard ass, bro?
I ain't your bro.
I wish I could have done more. just got hurt.
You did enough. You took one for the team. Be proud.
Yeah? Yeah!
Feels like we're flying high these days.
Now, more than ever.
He's a keeper, all right.
Yeah! Together,